under the vaulted expanse of the Galactic Union Hall, where delegates gathered to review the latest navigational charts. Every system shimmered in crystalline detail until the borders of map space stopped abruptly. The glowing projection of the stellar map ended in a jagged curve marked only with the words human territories. There were no routes beyond, no station codes, no survey data. The abrupt cutoff was treated with such casual finality that no one voiced a question. The pause between the last known system and the void beyond was accepted as if it were a natural phenomenon, like the edge of a cliff where nothing more could possibly exist. For as long as the protagonist could remember, the gap had been there, and no one seemed interested in closing it. They had been obsessed with maps since childhood, tracing shipping lanes and wormhole connections, memorizing stellar cartography until entire sectors could be reconstructed from memory. Completeness mattered. Every uncharted asteroid belt, every drifting derelict, was a challenge. And here was a border so absolute, so intentionally left blank, that it mocked the very idea of exploration. When others looked at the human frontier, they saw an obstacle. The protagonist saw an invitation. In academy lectures, the subject was neatly avoided. Training modules skipped over the sector. AI route planning software refused to draw a course that entered it, and exam questions never mentioned it. Fellow cadets treated the absence with the same studied indifference as their instructors, but their body language betrayed discomfort. There was no official decree forbidding entry, no posted law across the Union's sprawling bureaucracies. Yet the idea of crossing into human space was as unthinkable as walking naked into the airless void. Even the Union's boldest merchant guilds and most reckless mercenary captains were content to skirt its edge without lingering. The protagonist's first breakthrough came during archival research for a class project. In the dusty fragments of pre-standardized star maps, they found references to routes cutting straight into the blank space. The coordinates were half-faded, some overwritten with newer notations. Yet the shapes of the star clusters matched known human systems. These older maps suggested not only that travel into human space had once been possible, but that it had been routine. The trail stopped abruptly a little over a century ago, with later records omitting any reference to the expeditions. Deeper digging revealed a pattern in public data logs. Expeditions marked as lost in the vague, bureaucratic language that suggested accidents or natural hazards. But there was an eerie consistency to the reports. Complete signal loss at the border, no wreckage, no survivors. Some logs contained single-line notes, embargo enforcement confirmed. No elaboration. When cross-referenced with trade records, there were sudden drops in shipment along adjacent routes, followed by spikes in unrelated sectors, as though commerce had reoriented itself to avoid the human frontier altogether. Driven by both curiosity and irritation, the protagonist tried a different approach. Personal testimony. Retired traders, long-serving captains, and old navigation officers were reluctant to speak. One elderly ambassador agreed to meet in a private chamber, but shut down the moment the subject arose. His pupils dilated, frill trembling, and he whispered, "That border isn't for your protection," before refusing to elaborate. He left quickly, shoulders hunched, as if fearing the very walls might hear. The warning only fueled the protagonist's resolve. They filed discreet access requests to diplomatic archives, most of which came back denied with a kind of automated refusal that hinted at human oversight. Days later, their private comm terminal flashed with an anonymous message, encrypted beyond casual decryption. "Do not cross. Not for your sake. For theirs." The phrasing was strange. Not for your sake, but theirs. It suggested something deeper than simple territorial defense. Something mutual. There was only one human diplomat regularly present in the Union's central hub, an envoy named Commander Rains. He was unassuming by human standards, tall, calm, prone to understated humor, but carried an aura of quiet confidence. Catching him between meetings, the protagonist posed her question casually, as though it were a quirk of academic interest. Why did the stellar map end where it did? Rain smiled faintly, a reflexive human gesture that could mean amusement or dismissal, and replied with something about old borders, old reasons. Before the protagonist could press, he glanced at his wrist chrono, muttered an apology, and left. It might have been nothing, except for the flicker in his eyes just before he turned away. Not annoyance, not disdain. Fear, quickly buried but impossible to miss. That look refused to leave the protagonist's mind. It was the same expression they'd seen in the ambassador, in the traders, in anyone confronted with the question. Fear without context. Fear without an obvious source. And it was this that made the absence on the map intolerable. A blank space could be filled. A mystery could be solved. But fear without cause? That was something different. That was a challenge to the very principle of exploration. The Union prided itself on openness, on shared knowledge and collective advancement. Yet here was a shared silence, an absence maintained by universal agreement, and unbroken for over a century. It was too precise to be neglect, too deliberate to be accident. It was as though the galaxy had drawn a curtain and agreed never to look behind again. The protagonist knew, with the certainty and obsession that had gripped their mind for years, that they would not rest until they crossed that border, no matter the cost. The Hall star map still hung in their mind, glowing and vast, every route neatly catalogued, except for that one void, that silent frontier. And in that absence, they could almost hear something breathing. The decision was made long before the protagonist admitted it to themselves. Every conversation, every fragment of suppressed data, every flicker of unease in the eyes of those who should have been fearless had built toward this point. The human frontier was not simply a blank space on a map. It was a wound in the collective record, a deliberate omission. Curiosity had become compulsion. A forged travel permit was the first necessity. Official channels would never authorize a crossing. So a sympathetic slicer in the underdeck markets produced a falsified route designation buried inside an approved cargo manifest. The protagonist acquired a small survey vessel capable of extended range jumps without relying on Union beacons. Friends and colleagues, upon hearing their plan, reacted with disbelief that hardened into anger. One crewmate candidate refused outright, saying they would sooner sail into a pulsar's corona. Others cut contact entirely, unwilling to be associated with the attempt. Departure was silent, routed through minor lanes where traffic monitoring was sparse. As the border neared, the survey vessel's instruments began to show irregularities. Stellar coordinates that had been stable throughout the journey shifted by fractions of a degree, as though the very sky were subtly rearranging itself. Standard NAVAIs, when queried for recalibration, returned a single error string before shutting themselves down. It became clear that every automated system had been designed to fail this close to human space, perhaps intentionally. Manual plotting was the only option. Days into the approach, the first transmissions appeared. They came on frequencies that should have been silent for centuries, carrying faint, degraded voices. Some begged for assistance. Others screamed coordinates before cutting out mid-syllable. The languages were old, Union standards several iterations removed, as well as dialects from species now extinct. Cross-referencing these signals against public records yielded nothing. They were not listed in distress call registries, nor in any official incident reports. They were ghosts, stranded in time, still calling from deep within human territory. The closer they came, the more oppressive the silence grew. The background chatter of the galactic network faded as relay signals vanished one by one, until it was only the hiss of unfiltered space. Then the border itself appeared, not as a line on a display, but as a reality in space. Without warning, a formation of human vessels emerged ahead, closing distance without any detectable approach vector. One moment the void was empty. The next, they were there. Sleek, unmarked hulls bristled with weapon mounts. Every one of them locked on target. The lead vessel opened a channel. A human voice, steady and without emotion, instructed the survey ship to cut engines and prepare for escort out of the area. No threats were spoken, yet the precision in their formation, the quiet certainty in the voice, left no doubt as to their capability. The protagonist, unwilling to retreat, transmitted their intent. They were a cartographer, seeking only to map the region. The human commander did not respond immediately. When the reply came, it was a single sentence. Cross this line, and you will be forgotten. Every instinct warned against pressing further, but the thought of turning back felt like erasing a lifetime's work. They asked for permission to see even a single system beyond the border, arguing that a controlled visit could be harmless. Silence followed. When the commander spoke again, it was with a tone that was neither agreement nor threat. They would allow passage, under escort, to one designated system. There would be no deviation, no recording, and no transmission. If these conditions were breached, the visit would end before the breach could be acted upon. The escort took position, flanking the survey vessel so closely that any evasive maneuver would have resulted in collision. Human ships were not supposed to move this way. Their acceleration, their instantaneous alignment, defied known drive physics. Navigation data showed they were now within the border. Yet nothing outside the viewport looked different. The same stars, the same endless black, but the air inside the cabin felt heavier, as if the very act of being here carried weight. There was no conversation during the transit. The humans did not broadcast identification codes, nor did they explain their presence. When the protagonist attempted to initiate casual communication, the channel was locked down before a single word could be sent. They began to suspect that the humans were not merely preventing mapping data from leaving, but were ensuring that even incidental information would be stripped from memory. Hours later, the escort slowed. A single system appeared ahead, its primary star casting pale light over several worlds. The human commander's voice returned, calm and final. "You will see only this. Understand that you asked for it." There was something in the tone, not a threat, but the weight of history, the kind that could crush entire civilizations. The protagonist felt the urge to speak, to question, but remained silent. The border was behind them now, and what lay ahead would either answer everything or prove that some questions were better left unasked. The system ahead looked deceptively ordinary at first glance. A yellow-white star sat at its heart, encircled by planets whose orbits were too precise, too symmetrical to be the work of chance. Every world had been altered. Oceans shifted into perfect curves, continents smoothed into geometric elegance. Moons hung in configurations that suggested careful placement rather than natural capture. The symmetry was mesmerizing and deeply unsettling, a reminder that nature's beauty was often imperfect, and this was something else entirely. The escort led onward without explanation. As the survey vessel drifted past the outer planets, a massive ring came into view, circling a verdant, untouched world. The structure was colossal, stretching across thousands of kilometers, etched with symbols and scripts from dozens of civilizations. Names scrolled endlessly across its surface, each one sharp and clear despite the sheer scale. The protagonist recognized some script from archives, others from extinct species that had vanished long before they were born. The ring was not a monument to a single people. It was a ledger of the dead. The human commander's voice returned, quiet enough that it seemed meant only for the one hearing it. This was not a war trophy, they explained, but a memorial. Every name belonged to a civilization that had gone to war with humanity. Some had launched unprovoked attacks. Others had attempted conquest. Still others had committed acts that could not be forgiven. In each case, humanity's retaliation had been final. There were no survivors of those conflicts. Entire star systems had been sterilized, not in rage, but in deliberate, calculated acts meant to ensure the threat would never rise again. The protagonist tried to reconcile this with the image of humanity the Union presented. Diplomatic, cooperative, even welcoming in trade. The commander anticipated the thought. Humanity did not seek expansion, did not start wars. But when drawn into one, they ended it completely. That history had nearly broken the galaxy once, until an agreement had been reached among the surviving powers. Human space would remain off-limits, and the records of those wars would be erased from public archives. The blank border on the maps was not ignorance. It was a barrier of memory. When asked why this truth was hidden, the commander answered without hesitation. The galaxy needed stability, and stability depended on the illusion that humanity was just another species. Knowledge of what they were capable of would lead to fear, fear to preemptive action, and preemptive action to another war, a war no one could survive. The border was both a warning and a seal, keeping old truths buried and preventing new provocations. Those who crossed uninvited vanished not because of spite, but because allowing them to return risked the entire arrangement. The planet below the ring was untouched by cities or industry. It had been left as it was when humanity first claimed it, a sanctuary for wildlife, untouched by the conflicts that had filled the memorial. The commander said it was the only world spared in a campaign that had ended an empire's existence. It was not spared out of mercy, but to serve as a reminder to themselves of what restraint looked like. The ring above was for others. The world below was for humanity alone. Before the protagonist could respond, the commander's tone shifted. The border, they said, was not only to keep others out, but to keep humanity in. Isolation was a choice, one they honored because they knew what would happen if they forgot the cost of their history. "We are not your enemy," the voice said, "but we have been, and we could be again. Let's not tempt fate." The escort reversed course. No coordinates were shared, no navigational data allowed. The return journey was silent, the human vessels holding formation with perfect precision until the moment they reached the border, where they vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. The protagonist was left adrift just outside human space. Their ship system slowly returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. The maps in their possession remained incomplete. They could not record what they had seen without drawing attention, without breaking the unspoken pact. The image of the ring and its endless names burned into their mind. They understood that the silence was the only reason the galaxy still functioned as it did. Some truths did not belong to everyone. Some borders existed not to be crossed, but to remind all who saw them that there were limits. When they returned to the Union, there were no questions. No one asked what they had found, and they offered nothing. The blank space remained on the maps, a void at the edge of knowledge. Only the protagonists knew what lay beyond, and they carried the certainty that the void was safer than the truth. The galaxy had chosen forget for a reason. They would not be the one to make it remember.